Hi, my name is Dr. Brittany Singleton, and today I will be presenting to you Module 8 of the COVID-19 Vaccination Certificate Program. Module 8 is entitled COVID-19 Vaccines, Storage, Administration, and Post-Vaccination Considerations. It will be broken into 3 parts, and this is part 1 of 3. As I said, this is Module 8 of the 11 webinar series. Please tune in to the other modules for your CE credits and your certificate with full and final completion. I have here my contact information, including my email address. I would like to say I have no relevant financial relationships or commercial interests to disclose. This activity, parts 1, 2, and 3, are approved for 1.5 contact hours by the Accreditation Council for Pharmacy Education. Today we will cover Learning Objectives 1 and 2. We will be discussing the available COVID-19 vaccines currently being delivered in the U.S., as well as any additional ones that may soon be in the pipeline. And we will examine each COVID-19 vaccine in regards to its mechanism of action, its content, and its specific storage requirements. I want to remind you all that this is rapidly changing information, and this presentation is current as of December 15th of 2021. The COVID-19 vaccines. There are currently 3 COVID-19 vaccines that are being distributed in the United States under FDA approval or emergency use authorization. The Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna vaccines were both approved for emergency use authorization in December of 2020, and that was quickly followed by the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which was approved in February of 2021. Unlike certain other vaccines that we may be used to handling, the COVID-19 vaccines work by a different mechanism. There are 2 different mechanisms of action between these 3 vaccines. So 2 of them, the Pfizer and Moderna, are mRNA vaccines, and Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a viral vector vaccine. All of these vaccines have very important to their function, the spike protein of the coronavirus. If you take a look at the graphic, the coronavirus is here, and you can see it pictured with multiple sorts of protrusions on its membrane. And this one protein that is protruding on the membrane, that is the large red one, that is the spike protein. And so for the mRNA vaccines, the mRNA is delivered to the cells. It goes in and uses the machinery of the cells, ribosomes, to do translation, if you guys remember that, which creates proteins. So it uses the mRNA to send a message, like a blueprint, to the cells, and the machinery of the cells will pump out spike proteins. And so the body is going to create antibodies or immunoglobulins against the spike protein of the coronavirus, so that if it should ever see the coronavirus in real life, then it has antibodies against it already via that spike protein. The viral vector vaccine actually uses a harmless virus, an adenovirus. Sometimes adenovirus causes the common cold, but the viral vector vaccine includes that blueprint for the spike protein within the viral packaging. And so when that harmless virus does infect a person from the vaccine, it is going to carry the genetic code for the spike protein, and the body will begin to make spike proteins, and immunoglobulins will form against that spike protein, or antibodies will form against that spike protein. Here you can see the antigen, and it's kind of like a lock and key mechanism. So this would be an antibody right here, or an immunoglobulin, and it would connect and fit sort of lock and key with the antigen protein, which in this case should be the spike protein for the coronavirus. I want to talk to you first about the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccines. There are multiple specific vaccine products that Pfizer has put out at this point, and they are the most complicated to handle and store, and so I want to begin with those. So the original Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, also known as Comirnaty, is a drug suspension that needs to be diluted with preservative-free normal saline. It comes in multi-dose vials, and it actually comes in multiple formulations at this point, and we're going to talk about all of them. The Pfizer vaccine is a 2-dose primary series separated by 21 days. This vaccine showed good efficacy in its trials. It reduced hospitalization and death. At this point, based upon the multiple formulations, this vaccine is the only one that's going to be indicated for children and adolescents. So it is indicated currently for those 5 years of age and older. So kids and adults. Okay. One of the special things about this vaccine that makes it a little difficult to handle and store is that it requires ultra cold freezing temperatures. It can also be stored frozen at standard frozen temperatures or standard refrigerated temperatures, but it's gonna get its maximum storage potential at ultra cold storage. The NIH made these very cute little infographics that give a lot of information about the contents of each COVID-19 vaccine. So I've included them here for you. They're kind of nice for patients as well. They give a simplistic, fairly easy to understand explanation of the components of the vaccine. And then they also have a little blurb right here that kind of breaks down any misconceptions or any misinformation about what may be in the vaccine that's actually not there. So of course we know that the active ingredient in the Pfizer vaccine is the mRNA, the nucleoside modified mRNA, encoding for that viral spike protein from SARS-CoV-2. This mRNA is going to be wrapped in a protective layer of lipid particles that are going to make sure that it gets safely delivered into the cells. And then all of this is sitting in a saline buffer solution, PBS buffer specifically for the original Pfizer vaccine, which contains salts and a little bit of sugar. And this saline solution is going to make sure that the vaccine remains stable until it is where it needs to be. Here are the 3 different formulations of the Pfizer vaccine. We have the purple top, the gray top, and the orange top. I'm not sure if you've encountered all of these in practice yet, but if you haven't, you probably will soon. The purple top, I'll call that the original version. This one is for patients 12 years of age and older, so I would say adolescents and adults. The gray top is a newer version or a more recently released version of the vaccine, which is also for adolescents and adults. The dose and the dose volume are the same between the original and this newer version with the gray top, 0.3 mils or 30 micrograms. The major differences between these 2 formulations for adults and adolescents is that the original vaccine requires 1.8 mils of diluent with normal saline, and the newer version, the gray top, has no dilution required, which actually makes it a lot easier to handle and administer. You obtain 6 doses per vial from both of these vaccine vials. So same dose volume, same amount of doses per vial, same age group that can be served, but one requires dilution and one does not. Then we have the orange top, and this is really the vaccine for those in childhood years, ages 5 through 11 years. The orange top is actually going to be a 10 microgram dose. You're going to give a dose volume of 0.2 mils. It does need to be diluted as well with that normal saline. It is a 1.3 mil dilution, and you are going to obtain 10 doses per vial after dilution. Let's get a bit more specific with the purple top vial. Okay, it does have an ultra cold storage requirement, which actually makes it a little cumbersome to store and handle. This vaccine, again, is for those individuals 12 years of age and older. It is going to be given as a 2-dose primary series on day 0 and day 21. Both doses the same, 0.3 mils for volume, given intramuscularly in the deltoid muscle. And you're going to obtain those 6 doses per vial. And you have to reconstitute this vaccine with preservative-free sodium chloride, normal saline, 0.9%. One of the things that we have to remember with this vaccine is that we need to discard the vial when there's not enough vaccine to obtain a complete dose, and we don't need to combine residual vaccine volume from multiple vials to obtain a dose. Let's get down into the storage of this vaccine, which I'm sure many of you know all too well. The primary and preferred method of storage for this vaccine is at an ultra low temperature freezer. In that storage capacity, it can be stored up to the expiration date, which should be about 9 months. It can also be stored in the freezer. It can be stored for up to 2 weeks in the freezer, and interestingly enough, it can also be returned to the ultra low freezer one time during this process. So it can be stored for up to 2 weeks in a standard freezer temperature. Now, the vials can also be stored in the refrigerator for up to 30 days. But once they go into the refrigerator, the vaccine in the vial is going to thaw, and we should not be refreezing these vaccines once they have thawed out. Now, when we're getting ready for administration, we have to thaw the vials out. If we were to take the vials from the ultra low freezer temperature and we bring them into the refrigerator, a 195 vial carton may take about 2 to 3 hours to thaw out. And once you puncture those vials, you have about 6 hours of viability, according to the manufacturer, after you have diluted those vials to use it. If we allow the vials to come to room temperature, if they were frozen, it takes about 30 minutes to thaw. But if we allow them to come to room temperature, an unpunctured vial is viable for about 2 hours undiluted. It needs to be reconstituted within the first 2 hours of it reaching room temperature. And then once the vial is punctured, diluted, and everything, the viability goes up to 6 hours after dilution. It needs to be used within that 6 hours. I know that was all a little complex. I want to move on to the gray top Pfizer vaccine vial, this newer version of the vaccine. Again, it is for adolescents and adults. You will obtain 6 doses of vial. It does not have any dilution required. This helps us greatly in preparation. If we talk about the storage of this vaccine, it can be stored in the ultra low freezer temperature. It actually should not be stored in the standard freezer temperature, and so we should not freeze it in a standard freezer, either ultra low temperature or refrigeration. And the vaccine can actually be stored up to 10 weeks, which is great, in the refrigerator. If it's placed in the refrigerator from ultra low frozen temperature, again, it can take 2 to 3 hours for that 195 vial carton to thaw. And once the vials are punctured, they have about 12 hours of viability according to the manufacturer. And if we allow the vaccine to come to room temperature in these gray top vials, it can take 30 minutes to thaw, and unpunctured or punctured, its viability is 12 hours according to manufacturer. Lastly, for the Pfizer vaccines, I want to talk about the pediatric version, which is going to be our orange top for kids 5 to 11 years of age. We still have a 21-day, day 0 and day 21 series, 3-week series. The dose is going to be a little different for this vaccine. It's going to be 0.2 mils, and we're going to be able to obtain more doses per vial. Instead of just 6 doses with this formulation, we get 10 doses every vial. It is going to have to be reconstituted, however, and it's going to be reconstituted with that preservative-free normal saline, 1.3 mils. It does have a preferential storage in the ultra-low freezer temperature. It also does not want to be stored in the freezer. So similar to the gray top vial, it should not be stored in the freezer. Okay, it can be in the ultra-low temperature, or it can be refrigerated for up to 10 weeks. Similar to the gray top vial. We should not be refreezing once thawed again, and we need to make sure we record that beyond use date on the carton. Now, if we refrigerate these vials and once we puncture them, let's say they were frozen, we refrigerate them so that they can kind of thaw the vial. Once we puncture it, we have 12 hours of viability. If we allow the vials to come to room temperature, diluted, undiluted, punctured, unpunctured, we still have that 12 hours of viability. There is a comment from the manufacturer that vial labels and cartons may state that a vial should be discarded 6 hours after the first puncture, but actually 12 hours for this formulation is appropriate, according to the manufacturer. Now, just because I have a sterile compounding background, I always think of USP 797 and beyond use dating. And it's really interesting that these vials are called multi-dose vials, where our standard definition of the multiple dose vial or multiple dose containers are that they're formulated for removal of portions on multiple occasions because they usually contain an antimicrobial preservative. But these vaccines do not contain antimicrobial preservatives, and our diluents that we dilute them with, if they are needing dilution, also do not contain those type of preservatives. So one of the things that we're considering when we say like 6 hours or 12 hours or 24-hour viability is that any container that is sterile and then is opened in standard air really should be used under the immediate use provision, which is within 1 hour. So it's hard to consider these vials multi-dose vials truly when the manufacturer is saying the vaccine is still viable. Are they talking about stability or sterility? You need both of them to consider beyond use date. So my recommendation is, once you have punctured any of these vials, to go ahead and use the contents as soon as possible. And definitely you must stay within the manufacturer's recommended times. I want to discuss a little bit about the thermal shipping container and this ultra low freezer temperature. Every pharmacy is not equipped with an ultra low temperature freezer, and if an ultra low temperature freezer is not available for the 195 pack cartons of your vaccine, then you can actually use the shipping container the vaccine came in for temporary storage for up to 30 days, roughly a month, if you may refill it with dry ice so that the contents stay at that ultra low temperature. When you receive this container, you need to refill it with dry ice within 24 hours of receiving it. You also are going to be recommended not to open it more than 2 times a day and not more than 3 minutes at a time when you do need to open this container. You should replenish the dry ice after that every 5 days. If we take a look at the shipping container, we'll see that A would be our dry ice pellets, B would be our vaccine carton that the vials are sitting in, C is just kind of the little section where these things sit, and then E would be the box itself, D would be the top. And you can't see, but if we flipped over the top, you would see that there's a temperature monitor or a digital data logger that is there monitoring the temperature, making sure that we maintain this ultra low freezer temperature for the vaccines. So this is really great that we can use the shipping container for storage. If we don't use the container for storage, the manufacturer actually would like us to return this container, this size. There's a smaller size that doesn't need to be returned, but this 195 carton does need to be returned to your supplier or manufacturer within 10 days after you received it or after you've used it for storage. So you can return it in the 30 days if you need to use it for storage. But this is a really good solution for those of us who don't have ultra low temperature freezers. I just wanted to mention handling of dry ice quickly, because dry ice is frozen carbon dioxide, and it can be a little dangerous sometimes, because if it comes in contact with your skin for more than a few seconds, it can cause frostbite. So we want to make sure that we never handle dry ice with bare hands. Always wear gloves for the very cold temperatures, and also the dry ice is going to go from a solid to a gas very quickly, releasing carbon dioxide. So you want to make sure you open this in a well ventilated space, because if not, the carbon dioxide can displace the oxygen in a space and cause suffocation or cause someone to pass out. So we want to make sure we work in a well ventilated room. Use the appropriate gloves for handling, and also store it in a container that allows for a little bit of venting, and not in a tightly sealed container that doesn't allow any venting, because that could cause expansion and possible explosion. I have a few more details on preparing the Pfizer vaccine. We want to use the needles and syringes for mixing that are supplied in an ancillary kit, and we'll talk more about the ancillary kit soon. We don't want to use the syringes and needles designated for administration to do the mixing or the diluting. When we do the dilution, we only want to use preservative-free normal saline. We do not want to use bacteriostatic normal saline or any other diluent, sterile water, anything else. We want to make sure we use the appropriate volume of diluents for each of the vaccine preparations for the orange and the purple cap. We don't need to use all the diluent in the vial, just the amount that's appropriate. And we're also going to use one diluent vial per every one vaccine vial. So we're not going to be sharing diluent vials and putting a few mils in this vaccine and a few in that when we're going to do a one-to-one. We're going to make sure that we do not shake this vial or any of the vaccine vials. Actually, we're going to gently invert them 10 times before and after adding the diluent, because we do not want to damage the vaccine. We don't want to damage the protein. And then we want to discard the diluent vial after mixing the vaccine. As I said, we are not going to mix and match diluent vials and vaccine vials one-to-one. Whenever we are withdrawing the vaccine, we're going to take the needle and put it into different places every time we're diluting and withdrawing, because this is going to help to decrease leakage and also decrease the possibility of coring, where a piece of the rubber stopper breaks off and goes into the solution, which could be dangerous for the patient. We want to remove air bubbles with the needle inside the vial. We want to leave the needle in the vial when we're removing those bubbles, because if we take the needle out of the vial to remove air bubbles, we have the potential to lose volume of vaccine while we're doing that. And additionally, we will not be combining any remaining or residual vaccine from different vials or multiple vials to get a full dose. If there is not a full dose, we want to discard the vaccine vial and just let go of that remainder. Here is a flow chart about preparing the Pfizer vaccine. It is a pretty complicated diagram. I only include it because it is necessary to remember the steps appropriately, and this is the most complex vaccine we would have to prepare. Some of these procedures or processes are the same that we would do for almost any of the vaccines, and so I'll just point out some of those here. We want to make sure that we start off by sanitizing our hands and our gloves, and we want to maintain a sterile technique as much as possible throughout preparation of this vaccine and all the others. We want to always note the vaccine lot number and expiration date before preparation, and inspect the vaccine product for appropriate appearance per the manufacturer's guidance on what it's supposed to be looking like. Is it clear, translucent, white, off-white? Shouldn't be any odd colored particulates or anything like that. Gently inverting the vaccine vial 10 times without shaking it. We want to begin by grabbing the diluent vial, the sterile normal saline, and we're going to remove the dust cover. So pop the little cap off. I want everybody to remember that the vial dust cover is just that. It's a dust cover. It's not ensuring that the rubber stopper is sterile. It's just something to kind of give a little protection and covering. So you always want to make sure anytime you're going to enter the vial for any reason to add volume in or withdraw volume out, that you are going to be swabbing the rubber stopper of every vial every time, just to ensure that we are maintaining sterility for patient safety. I will skip through a little bit to where we have pulled up our volume, our 1.8 mils of normal saline, and we're going to inject it into the vaccine vial. And we want to make sure that we equalize the vial pressure by doing air exchange. So as we push in volume, we want to make sure we allow air to come back into the syringe to take its place. If not, we can leave pressure in the vial. If we exit the vial without allowing that air to come back up into our syringe, we can pressurize that vial, and that would be bad, because when it's time to draw out our dose, we can actually cause it to spill or squirt out of the vial because of the pressure that we put in. So make sure we equalize our air pressure. We talked about no shaking, recording the time and date of dilution on the vial label. We want to also protect the vaccine from light. When we are getting ready to finally pull out our dose for our patient, we want to select the appropriate syringe. So we want a low dead volume syringe, 1 ml syringe for vaccine administration. We don't want any syringes that are going to leave a lot of residual volume in them. And we'll withdraw our 0.3 ml dose if we are using our purple or gray top vial, 0.2 ml for our orange top vial. We will remove the bubbles from the syringe with as little force as possible. I know many of us are used to like plucking and tapping and knocking on our syringes to get those bubbles out, but we will try as much as we can not to agitate that vaccine even though it's already in that syringe. And then we want to inject the vaccine immediately. Now we'll move on to the other vaccines that are available right now. The Moderna COVID-19 vaccine is next. The Moderna vaccine is a preservative-free drug suspension. You will obtain more doses per vial with this one. It's a 2-dose series separated by 28 days, so a little longer for the dosing interval for the primary series. It had pretty good efficacy during its clinical trials. And this one is indicated for adults. And it has a nice storage procedure, cold freezer. That helps us a lot not having to worry about that ultra cold freezing temperature for this vaccine. Just to give more of an overview, again, the Moderna vaccine is for adults 18 years of age and older, and although testing or trials are going on for younger populations, it is still right now approved for adults. It's going to be a 0.5 ml, 0.5 ml dose IM, and as I said, you're going to get 10 doses per vial, and you don't have to dilute it. Yay! Here are the ingredients for this vaccine, and they're very similar to the Pfizer vaccine as far as the mRNA that's going to be wrapped in that lipid layer, and it's going to be sitting in a saline buffer solution. The Moderna vaccine should be stored in the freezer. It can also be stored in the refrigerator, so it can be stored in the freezer up to its expiration date, or it can be stored in the refrigerator for up to 30 days. We should also not refreeze it once it's thawed out. If we take it from the freezer to the refrigerator and we give it about 2.5 hours to thaw out, we should let it stand for 15 minutes at room temperature before giving it to the patient. And if we puncture the vial that was refrigerated, it's viable for up to 12 hours. If we have the vial at room temperature, it'll take an hour to thaw from being frozen, and an unpunctured vial is viable for up to 24 hours according to manufacturer. Punctured vial viable for up to 12 hours. And last but not least, the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. This vaccine is a little different than the other two as far as mechanism of action, which we discussed. It is the viral vector vaccine that we have available here. One of the other nice things about it is that it's a single dose regimen. So instead of a 2-dose series, it's just a 1 dose for its primary regimen. It showed a bit less efficacy in its clinical trials. However, the outcomes weren't exactly the same. The time frame and locations were different as well. This is also for adult patients, and it's very nice that its storage is refrigerated temperature. So as I said, this one's for adults. We get 5 doses per vial. Our doses are 0.5 mils, and it doesn't need to be diluted. Another one, yay. Here are the components of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. We have the genetic material for the spike protein, and it is going to be basically in the shell of the virus. So it's going to be loaded into the virus so that when the virus does begin to replicate in the body, it doesn't harm you, but it creates the spike proteins through its immune mechanism, and you are going to form antibodies to the spike protein. And this also sits in a buffer solution. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine should be stored in the refrigerator, and it should not be frozen. It's very nice that it can be 1 dose and it can be stored in the refrigerator. We want to keep it refrigerated until thawed. If it comes delivered to you frozen, we would keep it refrigerated. And once the vial is punctured, it's viable for up to 6 hours, I guess, refrigerated. And then for room temperature, if it came frozen and we needed to thaw it, if we brought it to room temperature, it would take 1 to 2 hours to get there. If the vial was not punctured, at room temperature it's viable for 12 hours, but if the vial is punctured, it's viable for only 2. I want to just discuss quickly the vaccine cold chain. The vaccine cold chain is basically this chain of responsibility to keep the vaccines at the correct temperatures for storage and administration and maintain that viability of the vaccine product. While it's in the manufacturing phase, it's the manufacturer's responsibility, of course. And in the distribution phase, it's the manufacturer and distributor's responsibility to maintain that cold temperature that's appropriate for each vaccine. But once the vaccine arrives at your facility, once it's being stored and handled at the facility, all the way until it gets to patient administration, it is our responsibility as vaccine providers to maintain the cold chain for vaccines. If not, we would have vaccines that were not viable or lost their efficacy. So the ability to actually protect patients would be diminished if we do not maintain the cold chain. So maintaining the temperatures for the vaccines is very important. However, temperature excursions do happen. If you ever have a situation where the vaccine has a temperature excursion, it's outside of its appropriate range, the first thing you should do is report it to your vaccine coordinator or supervisor. And you should also label the vaccines do not use and separate it from the stock. We don't have to immediately throw them away, but we should definitely label them do not use and separate it from the unaffected stock of vaccines. Then we want to document what happened, as much detail as possible about the situation, the date and time that it happened, the temperature you found them at, the inventory of which vaccines are affected. And then if we have that temperature monitoring device, that digital data logger, we should be able to figure out the time frame that the vaccines were out of the appropriate temperature, and we can document that as well. Then we want to contact our immunization program and or the vaccine manufacturers to discuss with them the details of what happened and get any guidance that they might give. And also, whenever possible, try to correct the problem. So if the temperature alarm is going off repeatedly, do not disconnect the alarm until you have determined the cause and possibly addressed it. And of course, we can figure out from the basics, perhaps the power supply is off, so maybe the power cord got unplugged. Is the door closing appropriately? Is there something in the way that's keeping the door open for the refrigeration or the freezer mechanism? Is the thermostat set appropriately? All of those things are things you can check, and you can try to correct the problem. There are some additional COVID vaccines that I want to mention. The AstraZeneca vaccine is one that I would like to mention. This one is also preservative-free drug suspension. It comes in multi-dose vials of 8 or 10 doses a vial. It is another 2-dose series vaccine. You will have a dose of 0.5 ml, and it's given within a 4 to 12 week interval, so 1 to 3 months. This vaccine is a viral vector vaccine. It is indicated for adult patients at this time, and it requires refrigerated temperature. This vaccine is being distributed already in several parts of Europe, in Africa, also in the Caribbean. And this vaccine is nice because it doesn't have that ultra cold storage requirement. It can do a standard refrigeration temperature. It is already being distributed in different parts of the world, but it has not been approved for distribution here in the U.S. And based upon the way our other vaccines have cornered the marketplace right now, I'm not sure if and when the AstraZeneca vaccine may come our way, but it is a contender out there. Another vaccine that's out there is the Novavax COVID-19 vaccine. It is a preservative-free drug suspension with 5 doses per vial. It had really good efficacy in its trials so far. One thing that's different about this one is the mechanism of action, so it's a little more familiar to us as a protein adjuvant vaccine instead of viral vector or mRNA vaccine. It's being studied in people of several different ages, including the elderly as well as adolescents. And it is a 2-dose series, 3 weeks apart, kind of similar to the Pfizer vaccine, 0.3 ml dosing. It's being studied in people with a range of ages, so adolescents to the elderly. And it's really nice that it can be refrigerated, and it doesn't seem to have any of those ultra cold storage issues like the Pfizer vaccine. So some patients may be a little more comfortable with this one, but it has not been approved yet for distribution here. So we'll see if it ever comes up the pipeline. And I have here more resources for information for you guys. Specifically, resources 4, 5, and 6 would be the healthcare professionals site. from the manufacturers for each of the vaccine products that we have just talked about, and it'll give you a lot more information if you're looking for these vaccines. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please post in the discussion board. And that concludes our presentation, part 1 for Module 8. Thank you.